you said.
There's a guy, he's a communist, left-leaning, writes a bunch of stuff about communism, gets really popular, has a bunch of really left-leaning ideas, right? He goes through his career, and then at the end of it,
Let's go here. Let's do that. Hello, hello. Oh, here we go. I think we have sound now. Let's see if we have any viewers. I gotta wish them Merry Christmas and Happy New Year or Happy Festivus. Kwanzaa. Pick your. Let me go to my channel. Got anybody with us today? Oh, Kevin doing your weird headstands back there.
Oh, can I show you a trick?
Go ahead, show
I've
me.
been making the kids do it.
Okay.
It's a shoulder cartwheel.
A what?
A shoulder cartwheel.
A shoulder cartwheel. Okay. Do we have anybody today? Make sure I have sound on this. Let's see. Burr, burr, burr. Yep, we got sound. I want to get back. Oh. Hello. Okay, that's pretty. Oh yeah, I've seen that before. That was making me dizzy. Oh. All right. So the question is, what is your? Why do you ask me this question? Is there somebody who?
No, I was just thinking about it. I remember my old high school English teacher was really all about only reading into the text, and you couldn't assume what the author was trying to say unless you could find that within the text. But
That's a very legalistic way
yeah,
to interpret text. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule to interpretation. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
you have a very textual interpretation of something, but you can also have very historical interpretation. You can have a gender interpretation. You can have, and you can look at it from the idea of, how do different readers interpret the text
Yeah.
over, different periods of time. There's no, I've seen things where people say, like, let's look at all the different texts. Like, I did a lot of work. I went for my master's degree in literature, and specifically Joyce and Beckett and other Irish and other modernists. Mostly European, but some American, like Faulkner. Who else? Hemingway.
I used to read books.
But there have been critical, like, really cool things done about, like, let's look at all the different references in Joyce, that he uses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's.
Are you talking about like pop culture references or
That,
references?
I mean,
to the
anywhere.
works?
Like one of my colleagues in the program was looking at he was a musician by training, and he was looking at all the like musical references in Joyce. And Joyce was a great lover of opera.
Yeah.
But other work too. I mean, there was nothing that Joyce didn't touch in his. I mean, that's why Joyce is Joyce.
Yeah.
Kind of like Shakespeare is Shakespeare,
Yeah.
because there's just the work is so dense with references just across all sorts of artistic, cultural, literary. I mean, just everything.
Yeah.
Political, historical, mythical, like everything. Like any kind of angle you want to put in, and take towards the work is possible. I mean, if you want to look at the work as a reflection of some sort of Joyce put his own life and his own personal and familial history into his works. He put himself as a character in both Portrait of the Artist and in Ulysses.
Yeah.
A younger version of himself, right? A literary version, not literally himself, but.
Do you treat it as like Joyce himself, the character, or like is there a separation?
There's absolutely a separation, right?
How do you make the distinction between like who the author is and
It can be tricky.
like as a person and like the character and.
I mean, what you can see. I mean, some writers are very literal about this being me. This character is me.
Yeah.
But even that is something that is not entirely reliable, because what I consider to be myself, what I construct as my being or is itself a kind of a fabrication, not in the line sense, maybe in the line sense, but it's something that is constructed by any person, but certainly by an artist or a writer.
Yeah.
So you could say, look, this narrator or this character is meant to, represent the author's true self or true perspectives. And you could probably verify that or challenge it based on whatever other literary evidence you have, like their letters, their interviews with their family members or with themselves. You could have a whole series of things, diaries that they've kept, to see whether or not, yes, this is really what this author thought. But
You never truly know.
But sometimes, I did when I was an undergrad, my my undergraduate thesis for my honors program was looking at Thomas Hardy's narrators as being not people assumed that like Hardy's narrators were representing his beliefs. They just assumed like this is what Hardy says, right? There would be no separation between the narrator and Thomas Hardy, the author.
Yeah.
And my thesis was essentially looking at one of his first novel, in fact, that nobody ever reads, and talking about all this sort of how unreliable that narrator was intentionally, right? And you could see it, that this was not something that was an accident, and that there was definitely a difference between the narrator and Hardy. There are similarities, but there are also some pretty big differences. And so, people assume that the narrator in a work is somehow the authorial, the author's perspective on things, but that's not necessarily always true, and it's often false.
Or I used to fall into the mistake of assuming that the speaker, the narrator of the story was a direct connection into the author's head.
And it can be. But Victorian novels in general, this was something very common where there was an unreliable, or an unreliable narrator, or a narrator that is very suspect in and of themselves, was a character in the book.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are narrators. It's interesting in Victorian novels, in a lot of novels you have they start off as letters. There's some correspondence.
Yeah.
So that's like a framing device.
Exposition. It's a hack now.
But it's also a distancing device, right?
Yeah.
It's something that someone else is interpreting. What was it? I was just reading I just bought my kids a book by Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah.
And they find a letter. They find like a secret message in a book, right? And that in and of itself is like kind of a framing device. But you can go back to like a book like Tristram Shandy, where they really play with this stuff. And this is, Victorian, people don't give Victorian novelists a lot of credit for some reason, but they were really sophisticated in terms of their narrative devices. But, I don't think there's ever any right way to look at a text. It's kind of like Jiu Jitsu, there are wrong ways, but
I agree.
there are no
You can't pick
exclusively the right, correct way, because there's just a lot of interesting things that you can look at.
You can analyze it through any scope you want.
Anything you want. So,
Weird.
that's why I have trouble with like the kind of originalist theory of, although people would say, and I think they have some degree, they're correct to a certain degree, that a novel or a poem or whatever is meant to entertain, whereas a constitution or a law is meant to govern. And so, you should be, there can be a difference, a qualitative difference in how you interpret these things, because they are meant to serve a very different purpose. So I think there's some truth to that, but in terms of ascertaining authorial intention, it only gets you so far. And then what's interesting is I started reading about Jefferson, the founders, and their ideas of how the Constitution should change. And they were not originalists.
Yeah.
None of them were sitting around saying we're writing, these are not Moses' tablets, that are written in stone. They were very much the believers in a changing and evolving constitution.
But is that, I thought they meant, or the idea was that the Constitution itself would change, not that the meaning within the Constitution would evolve, right?
You know, the founders, I mean, it's hard to generalize, but like the most famous, like the 4 or 5 men who contributed the most, you know, to the kind of fundamental thinking of the Constitution, how we structured our government. They were men who were extremely sophisticated. The only exception, I think, would be George Washington, who wasn't exactly a scholar. But,
Good general.
well, he's an interesting character. But anyway, you know, these were guys that were very much aware of the dangers of a kind of a calcified, permanent, non-changing, and also like how to read things. You know, like we kind of think that we're a lot more intellectually sophisticated than people 300 years ago, but we're 3,000 years ago. It's just not true, you know? So I think, you know, what you don't hear a lot of is, you know, what the founders actually believed was the correct, quote-unquote, way to interpret a constitution. And the reason you don't hear about it is because A, people don't know anything about history, but generally, you know, just don't dig that deep. But B, you could be sure that if the people who believe in originalist interpretation, if they could get that kind of like appeal to authority and say, well, this is how Jefferson or Adams or Hamilton or, you know, really thought about it, they would have cited it, but there isn't that.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I think there's contrary evidence, especially in terms of what I've seen so far, very quickly was, you know, Jefferson. I mean, there was this whole idea of like, in the law, it's something very similar too called the dead letter, where, you know, whatever the statute or the law or the Constitution, you know, it's built, it's written with a given set of like circumstances.
Yeah.
And this is something that courts are called upon to interpret all the time, which is, okay, Congress or whomever who wrote this thing that we're called upon to interpret, you know, we're facing a certain set of circumstances, and they didn't know about these other circumstances. And so courts have always been empowered to fill in the gaps, you know, or deal with situations where, you know, the law doesn't quite match or isn't up to the circumstances that it's been, you know, that has to apply to right now.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, people say now, like, oh no, the courts can't do anything with that. It has to go back to the legislature, or the Constitution has to be amended. And that just isn't true. That's never been true. That's not how in the American or English legal system, anything, like England, for example, doesn't even have a constitution. I mean, they do, they have an unwritten constitution. But it's not written down.
Yeah.
It's essentially, from what I understand, I'm not an English law scholar, is like a set of conventions and rules and, you know, guidelines that how things get interpreted and how things are done.
Yeah.
But if you ask someone, like, what are the principles, they'd all be able to tell you what they are. There's not a text. So it's just a very interesting thing to, and of course it's very political. You know, no one really talked about originalism until, I think, probably abortion or slavery. Probably even, maybe if you go back, I'm sure like the debates around slavery spurred some intentionalist or originalist, you know, calls for that type of interpretation, because it suited people politically to say that. I mean, that's another way you can interpret any text, is like how it's been interpreted, right, over time. Interpretations of texts change all the time by, you know, over the periods.
Interpretation of laws variable.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's not a very satisfactory answer.
I'm trying to bring it back to jiu-jitsu. Like thinking about how they're the same and how they're different, right? Because like jiu-jitsu starts as like a way of doing things with a specific set of rules, and then as time goes on, those rules aren't enough. There's like new things happen, right? You need to make little changes to what has been the known system to be able to deal with the new things that are happening, right? But I think the difference between like jiu-jitsu and the legal system is usually the best way to do things will rise up on top, right? Like it'll eventually, the non-effective things get cleared out over time, and gradually like we piece together a pathway that works within the system.
You think ideally that is a way, but you know, there's this thing that happens between doctrine and where it becomes dogma.
Yeah.
Where we do things because it's always been done that way,
Yeah.
and because the founder says that we need to do it that way. And you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if what you did was exactly what Elio Gracie and Jorge Gracie taught you, you'd be really good. You would be really good in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
You know, if you just, you know, you see this a lot of times where guys that are old school, they do things really well. Very simple, straightforward, not necessarily easy, but ways of doing jiu-jitsu or approaching jiu-jitsu. Just keep your guard closed. Just don't open your guard.
Yeah.
You know, and don't let the guy stand up in your guard. But times change, you know, and there's nobody who, that I know of, who is a current high-level competitor who's like, yeah, all I ever did was, you know, the basic and, well, advanced curriculum from Gracie Torrance. Not to say there aren't good people from Gracie Torrance, but I don't see them, I mean, in some it's like they don't go to competitions because they, you know, there's a couple of reasons I think they give, but the idea being like, well, it's not realistic, it's not really true to the spirit, you know, they call these, but this is what happens in a lot of martial arts, where you have this friction between the people who say, we want this to be effective. We do this martial art because we want it to work in these situations, whatever they are.
Yeah.
And then the other people say, no, we have to do what the founder said, right? If the founders were using pitchforks and tonfas and, you know, bow staffs, then we should all do that, and we should never learn any other. And then you have other people say, no, nobody walks around with a bow staff anymore. You know, we're not threshing grain, we don't have tonfas. We got to adapt this with something else, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, you're not doing that art anymore. You're doing something else. That's not what the founder meant.
Yeah.
We said a punch should be like this in the horse stance. Okay, but you know, you're practicing. It's like going to a city like Venice. Have you ever been to Venice? Venice is like empty. It's just a tour. There's no like real industry in Venice that I can see. Like there's glass blowing, but like Venice used to be like an imperial, like international, global power, and now it's like it's like Disneyland for tourists, right? There's no real industry. It's a tourist industry in Venice.
Sorry, Venice.
Well, if you want your martial art to stay the same all the time and never evolve, it's like the Venice of martial arts. It's like something that is really beautiful in glass or under glass for people to look at.
Yeah.
And it could be, if you go to Venice, it's beautiful. The architecture's beautiful, and the art, and you know, the canals, and the music, but it's like, it's not alive, right?
Yeah.
It's not, no one's expecting Venice to go back and like plunder any cities or become a great mercantile power again.
You know what I really like? Like, it's not like there's a single person who decides what is going to be the solution to whatever the newest jiu-jitsu problem is, right? It's not like we go to the best person and we go, Gordon, you know, there's this new position. Tell us how we should fix it. And then he tells everybody and we rejoice and learn it and then go about our business. That's not what happens, right? The problem exists and then everybody tries to solve it whenever they get to
It's
it.
open source.
Yeah, and
It's
then
like open source.
exactly. And then the technique appears, right? No one person can claim it. They can do it. They might be the first person to do it, but like they also aren't really in charge of the situation that creates the
You don't own
environment.
it.
Yeah, it's
You
like,
don't own that technique.
because that problem exists everywhere for everyone. Whoever can get into that problem will face that problem. They will try and solve that problem.
Yes.
And the best solution to that problem is going to be most likely very similar over here to over here to over here to over here to over here.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge strength of jiu-jitsu is that, like you're saying, like there's no single, there are people that are more or less authoritative, that people will listen to,
Yes.
right? And say, okay, well, that's a good perspective. I'll try that, right? The IBJJF, you know, if they see something new that's a problem, they'll just ban it, right? That's a solution. We don't like that. We just ban it, or we don't give points for it, or whatever it is. But then another organization shows up and says, oh, no, you want to do heel hooks? Like, please, everyone come here and do heel hooks.
Give us your money, please.
And technically, you can say, well, Hodger Gracie says, or Hickson says, or, you know, Gordon says, or John Danaher says, but there's enough variation in jiu-jitsu that, you know, you could go and be very successful listening to what Andre Galvao says, you know? And there's a lot of people who will be successful with Andre's stuff that would not be able to use Gordon's stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
But Dean Lister might have that
Dean,
one thing
yes.
that you need.
Absolutely.
Might have one idea that you have.
Jeff Glover is the, you know, kind of one of the authorities about Darcy's.
Yeah.
You know, for some reason, he's so good at that. Yeah, I think that's the real benefit of jiu-jitsu. Whenever you get down to the idea of like, well, the answer is X because this guy says it, then you're in trouble, right? Like, not to say that won't work, but if like...
It's a quick, very pragmatic answer. You know, it works, it solves the problem of like, what the person is actually trying to, like, have answered, you know? Like, maybe you're not speaking 100% truthfully, but like, by just pointing to Galvao and being like, he says it, so it's right,
I think, though, the way I would say it, and people are all different, right? I mean, some people would say, hey, if it's good enough for Andre, it's good enough for me. Like, what else do we need to do?
Who am I to say otherwise?
Who am I to say otherwise? And I don't think that's invalid to.
Yeah.
But for me, what I say is, well, this person says that this works in this situation.
Yeah.
If they're a good enough person, it's worth a try.
Yeah.
Like, you should put a lot of effort into seeing if you can't make that thing work. Because if it works for them at that highest level,
Yeah.
it might work for you too. There's a good chance it'll work for you too.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is about those guys is that when you try to do the stuff that the highest level guys do, it's always funny because they're always like, it's very simple. You just do this, right? Why would you ever get stuck in somebody's closed guard? I don't understand. You just stand up and you put your butt back and yeah. Worm guard. That's so easy. You just do this. You know, you see Lucas Laprie just like totally avoid it. But they're so good that they seem to make things look so easy, right? And so when you're a white belt and you go and try to do the stuff that Andre tells you to do, you can't do it, but it's not because the technique isn't good technique, it's because you're new or you suck, or you need to work on some other things to even make that a possibility. I mean, I definitely felt that way, you know. People would show things and I'd be like, I can't do that, I can't make that work, or it just all falls apart, or I can never get into that position, or I can never make that grip. And it's because something else was missing in my jiu-jitsu that would prevent me from actually getting even to the point, or keeping it, or whatever it was. You know what I mean?
What if two authority figures disagree on a thing?
Can you think of an example of that happening?
Like, I don't know. I don't have like a historic example, but let's say like person A is like, guard passing is garbage, right? Guard passing is the worst. Everyone should be dropping down on footlocks, heel hooks. I don't know why people are passing guards these days. Terrible strategy. And there's over here, also world champion.
Yes.
I'm kind of picturing Galvao versus Gordon. But, you know, over here, more of a traditionalist mentality. Still, you know, variable, but would be a guard passer and would recommend this system, which conflicts with this system
Right.
in terms of its approach to strategy.
Yes.
How do you decide whose is more valid? Is one more valid than the other? Is one better for me, or?
I think that's what it is. What's one better for you?
But then how do you decide which one is better?
Well, I mean, do you feel like you are better off imitating or following, if you will, Gordon Ryan and his style? Or do you feel like you want to be, because they're very different styles.
Yeah.
Very different styles.
Yeah.
They're both very submission-oriented. They both have very decorated careers. But, you know, I always think of Andre as a top game player, right?
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, even though his passing is incredible, is seen as more of a guard player. He's the type that will come up off of a sweep, and then once you go to guard, he'll pass your guard very easily, but he very rarely, I mean, if you sit to guard, he'll pass, but he's not the type that's going to stand up on his feet for the whole match the way Galvao will do.
Yeah.
Galvao will stand up and just like beat you up on your feet until you do something silly, you know, or he scores, and then you have to do more than just, right? That's how he did Felipe Pena. He just kind of beat him up on the feet. Felipe couldn't take him down, and then he just punished him, right? And he just beat him up a little bit. It's a very different style. I mean, you never see Gordon go out there and just slap people around and like collar time so hard that they just, you know, you suck the life out of them. I don't think either one is less or more valid than the other. It's just like, what is your mentality? What is your style? Who would you rather be?
I don't have time for self-reflection. I just want to know which one's better.
I mean, if you're looking for like, so I mean, it's like, well, do you want to be gi or no gi? I mean, if you're looking for gi, I would go with Andre Galvao because he has won everything in a gi. Yeah. Whereas Gordon hasn't won. I mean, I'm not sure if he's won nothing in a gi. He may have won purple belt.
Hasn't Andre won more ADCCs?
Yes, but I'm getting to that, right? So if you want to do more no-gi, which is not the same as Abu Dhabi, right? Abu Dhabi is its own special little thing. I wouldn't tell somebody like, oh, we're just going to do Abu Dhabi rules, because that may not necessarily get you where you want to be as a jiu-jitsu athlete.
Do people tell each other that they do Abu Dhabi? I do Abu Dhabi. Do you train?
No,
bro, I do Abu Dhabi.
but I mean, look, I think John and that whole group have very much tailored their game to
submission
to winning. I mean, I think John has come out and said, like, the whole point, this whole project has been basically to identify the most efficient ways to win the most prestigious jiu-jitsu tournament. Right? And we're not going to bother with anything else. We're just going to focus in on like building the foundation and building our way up to that goal. I mean, every other tournament has just been a warm-up for Abu Dhabi, I think. And every other super fight, you know, that they do is just another practice session against another competitor that they're probably going to see, you know, or are likely to see at Abu Dhabi.
Would you choose Gordon's style?
I mean, I don't think I could really choose between Gordon and Andre because I'm not even close to their level of athleticism. I mean, I do a lot of, like, so I would say Gordon and I do a lot of the same things because we have the same instructor. Yeah. And so, like, you know, Gordon has been the beneficiary of the fact that John is a lot more coherent and complete system when he started training than when I did. Yeah. And John was focused 100% on grappling with Gordon for the last like 5, 6, 7 years, whereas when I was there, he was very much focused on MMA with George St. Pierre. So, but you know, we do shoulder, like the butterfly sweeps and the shoulder crunch stuff, and you know, the leg locks. You know, like that focus is something that we do this. I mean, he obviously does it much better on a much higher level than I do, but you know, like, I guess I would have to say, on reflection, I probably would choose Gordon because we come from the same root, right? I mean, it's easier for me to emulate Gordon because we share the same instructor, we share the same academy. More of a natural ideas overlap.
That makes sense.
I mean, I think Gordon came in as a young man and saw me working one day and said, you know what, I want my jiu-jitsu to look like Rich Jackson's. And then he went to John and said, hey, John, can you teach me to train like, but I mean, look, the fact is you go to John's classes, you'll see all the guys doing the same, more or less the same stuff.
All right, you sign up
except for Gary. Gary does some crazy stuff.
You sign up for like the Pokemon Go, but jiu-jitsu version, right? Team Red, Team Blue. Andre's on Team Red, Gordon's on Team Blue. For a new person who is just starting or joining the game, is there one that you would steer towards?
So I will say this, and this is, I've never been to Atos, right? I've never trained at Atos. I don't know anybody. I don't know, each school has its elite level guys and women, right, that are amazing. But if I were talking to somebody who is brand new, what I could say is that I know at Henzo's with John, who's not at Henzo's anymore, but you know, his instructor, like the people that came up under John are still there,
Yeah.
or many of them are. They're teaching, like Mike Jaramillo is now teaching the morning class. You don't know that name. Nobody knows who Mike Jaramillo is, but if you've been training Enzo's for a while, you know he's really, really good. He's been around. He's like, I think he's John's first black belt.
Wow.
And he's amazing. He's a super nice guy, amazing guy, very smart, very good. The thing that I think is really great about John and Renzo's is that they take a lot of people who are not natural or good athletes, people who are professionals and you know, from all walks of life, from all different stages, all different goals, and they can turn those people into pretty good jiu-jitsu players.
Yeah.
And sometimes, every once in a while, one of those guys breaks through and actually goes and gets on to, you know, wins an Abu Dhabi trial or wins a tournament, or, you know, and I'm thinking specifically guys like, although.
Who's the guy who did really well at trials?
Jason Lee's a guy I went to law school with. I mean, he's a good athlete, but he's a lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't know if he actually practices law. He went to law school with me, but I don't know if he still practices.
But he's not like training full time.
Not training. I mean, there's another guy like Doug Pelinkovich who's a great athlete, but again, not a household name. And when he shows up to a tournament, he usually wins double gold. He just is busy. You know, he has a life and family, and he runs an academy. But you know, like, he's another example. There was another guy that was Stanley. I forget his last name, but he showed up at trials and did really well. He's a Bronx guy from Doug's school. But I know a lot of guys who are just like just regular people who become very, very good at jiu-jitsu, and they're not anything that you look at and really expect that much out of them, right? And not to say that all of them could all be world champions if they just decided to do it, but they can take an average or below average person and turn them into a pretty good guy or girl. And I don't know if that goes through, but I mean, you know, if you went to an auto school, or you went to, let's say you went to AOJ, you know, how is their everyday guy? How is that guy like me? You know, like I would consider myself to be one of those guys, just an average recreational training, you know, person.
We had some of their blue belts come in a couple times, and I've had a couple Atos guys come into the Stanford club. They're usually like, I would say on the upper end of the skill spectrum in terms of their, like what they are in their rank. Like really good.
But are these college kids?
Yeah, like, you know, kids. Not like kid, but you know.
Yeah, they're
young adults.
Yeah.
And they move well, and they're,
yeah.
you know,
So, I mean, the thing is like, I would assume that most schools, if you take a pretty athletic guy who's young and they're late teens, early 20s, and that guy trains on a regular basis, they're gonna get really good.
Yeah, I don't know any like
middle-aged, 30-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure those guys are out there.
That's not true. Like I was an Atos affiliate, and so like I do know guys like Tim and Evan who are Atos people, but they don't train at headquarters very often. So I don't know if they fit the bill, but like solid good jiu-jitsu, like I don't know.
I think that there is more. What I can say, and I can't disparage. I can't say I don't really have a fair basis of comparison because I've never trained at Atos. You know, I'm not going to say like, oh, they're terrible at this. But what I could say is at Renzo's, you can be a very much sub-elite athlete and still become very good at jiu-jitsu. You know?
Jacob dropped into Atos. I should ask him. I don't know. But yeah.
Like I expect if you go and you roll with anybody's 18, they're gonna like murder you, right? Like they're all really good.
Yeah, but like also like more technical, different ideas. It's like a different flavor.
You know what kind of gets, this is something that I don't know what really happens, but a lot of times at academies you see these white tip belts, the black belts that are white tips, that say basically like I'm a competitor, not a teacher.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that at Renzo's, at least I'll speak to the morning class and the afternoon classes, which is where I spent most of my time. All the black belts were teachers.
Yeah.
Like there was nobody on the mat who you couldn't ask a question or they wouldn't teach you something.
That would be weird. Can you imagine? Like a black belt who was unable to teach you a thing?
I mean, there's something, what I don't mean is that they're not able, but that they just don't put the time in. They're just like, I come in, I train, and then I go home.
Yeah.
I'm a professional athlete. I don't have time to, you know, deal with the average, the masses.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing wrong with that per se, but like if you're the average person who's trying to like, hey, I'm not trying to be a world champion or even an avid competitor, I just want to learn some jiu-jitsu. I would recommend somebody going to a school where people aren't big timing you and being like, hey, we don't have time for the scrubs. Like, this is the comp team. If you want to be with the comp team, you got to compete. And if you don't, then like F off and just come to the regular classes.
Yeah.
Like, and again, I'm not saying that's how it is at these other schools.
But there is sometimes not like a
hierarchy.
system, a tier.
There's definitely maybe
Well, like,
I've been in a school where there's the inner circle
Like, you're not unimportant, but it's just that these guys
are more important.
are more important to me for very reasonable reasons, but I've only got so much time in my day, so I'm going to be over here. I've got some really great people I've vetted, they're going to help you out here, but I'm focusing on this, and this is just what I want to do. And it's like, you can't begrudge someone for wanting to focus on their
And I'm not, but I'm
competition.
just saying, like, if you're
interested in competition, that should be the team for you. If you're interested in learning jiu-jitsu to better yourself as a human being, maybe it would be better for you to go to a place where the instructor cares about the non-competitors as well.
I mean, when you talk about it, like, you have a limited amount of time as a person. Am I going to spend or focus my time on these 10 people who are, the flag bearers or standard bearers, and they're going to go out and compete? Because they deserve to have a full-time coach,
Yeah.
right? Or am I going to spend my time on the 99% of the school? Hopefully it's 99%. You don't just have 10 students,
Yeah.
right? Or 20 or 40. But that's what happens when you have like these big competition type schools. They're not usually that big.
Yeah.
Because if you're focused on those, it's those 10 or 20 prime athletes, then you don't have a lot of time for the other people, and they'll feel excluded because you don't have.
Well, the business model is usually you take your competitive team and you train them for free, and then make those people focus on the other people, right? Where it's
but that
there is the effect of like you can burn them out a little bit,
but those other guys don't want to do that. They don't want to teach.
Hey, if you want to train on my competition team, you're gonna have to put in some work.
But then there are the people who say, hey, all I want you to do is train.
Yeah, and if
you don't have to teach
if
anybody.
you're so good that you don't have to put in that sort of work, then yeah, like great, you're gonna do pretty well probably. But most people, when they're coming up, they're gonna have to, teach some kids classes or like whatever it is. It's just
there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
You got to kind of earn your keep, so to speak. That's true, but going back to what do you tell the new person? And you're trying to say Team Blue or Team Red, Gordon versus Andre Atos versus Enzo. I don't need to. I don't think you have to do that. I would say go to the place where average, everyday students are the focus of the school.
I would say go to the place
where you get good instruction.
Go to the place that has the most people that you get along with. And like if you're a competitive person, you'll probably vibe with the competition place. Even if the instructor doesn't focus on you. You'll be in a place where people work hard. If you like to work hard, that'll be your place. If you wanna
it is, yes, there should be matching your personality.
Yeah. Like if you're a hyper competitive person, you're not gonna want to go to a casual school and beat up on 9-to-5ers.
There are I was thinking it the other way of like there are a lot of people who feel like hey, I'm training with, or in the same place as these world champions, and therefore I'm getting kind of that training. And I would say if you are actually training with them, then maybe.
What's nice about championship places is usually there's a different atmosphere, right? Even if the person isn't focusing on you, the attitude of a competitive tournament focused place is different than a non-competitive place, just a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more rigorous. I'm not saying the relaxed people can't have discipline and can't be rigorous, but if you have a group of people who are there to work hard, you're more likely to work hard. And if that's what you want,
What I've seen is that the people who are training competitively are usually training at a different time than the regular classes. Usually, not always. And therefore, the focus, you're not really benefiting.
But you should be able to see what those people do, ideally, right? If they don't let you even watch or participate or get to know, or if there's no trickle down effect at all of that competitive spirit, then it's probably not worth it for you. You might as well just train at this other place, and then if you decide to go pro, then go to this new place, right? But it's weird. Lost my train.
I definitely would not. I mean, it depends on what the person's goal is, right? Like, hey, I want to be a world champion, or I want to fight MMA. I would say then you should go to those schools where that's the focus.
Even if you don't want to be a competitor, I think there's a lot of value in going and seeing how competitive people.
Yes, that is true. I agree.
And even if you don't want to fully participate in that lifestyle, it has value. You can take those habits, you can bring them into your own academy and foster those, and you will be more successful.
All true, but you just have to make sure that that actually is possible.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, like, you don't want to
like in John's, you know, or John's class.
Yeah.
But at Henzo's, in the beginning, everybody trained with everybody.
Yeah.
For good or for bad. You know, you would roll with everybody in that gym, Abu Dhabi champions, MMA fighters, you know, Henzo, High-end, you know, everybody. Mm-hmm. And you just basically, if you're a regular guy, you just get pounded on. I mean, it's actually easier to train with the really good guys because they don't need to murder you to actually, you know, prove anything.
You go in without hope, so you don't try, so it's less tiring.
I mean, they would yell at you if you're not trying, right? But you're not. It actually frees you up a little bit, right? Because you're not going to hurt them. You're not going to beat them. You have a lot of respect for them, and you should fear them to a certain degree, or at least respect them.
And nobody has any high expectations, so it's fine.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like but you get really good.
Yeah.
You get really good. Yeah. And people are teaching you all the time. Like everyone's teaching you, hey, do this, do that, don't do that, this, that. And you're getting it, and you don't ever, what the nice thing about when you go to a really high level academy is that there's never that idea of like, well, what if somebody else said? Like, okay, you say this, Henzo says this, but what does Hodger say? No, because Hodger's coming in to find out what Henzo says, you know, or what John says, or, you know. And if John says something, he'll tell you, and you don't have to worry, like, there's a better answer somewhere, right? You're pretty, whether that's right or wrong, you're confident in that answer.
You're pretty sure that they've at least thought about it more than you have.
And more than most people have.
Yeah.
Or they have more experience in dealing with that situation. But over time, you know, as the academies get bigger, and the priorities change and things fragment out, right? So there's MMA, there was an MMA focus that continues to this day at Henzo's. Great place to go and train MMA, right? Getting ready if you really want to be a fighter or you want to get experience in an MMA gym, like that's a great place to go. You know, there's a submission grappling kind of focus. But as things have fragmented out a little bit, like I remember like in the morning class, it used to be everyone trained with everybody, and then at some point, it was like, oh no, we can't let everybody train with the athletes, you know, because everybody wants to train with GSP, and everybody wants to train with Frankie Edgar, and everybody wants to train with whoever it is, like whoever the star is in the corner with John. Like everybody wants to turn, and John's like, no, it's not. They're not here for everyone to take turns on. You know, they're here to get some training, and they want it to be focused. Like I like GSP is not. I mean, he's very friendly. And I mean, if you asked him for anything, like a photograph or whatever, or an autograph, whatever, he would totally do it. Super nice guy, but like he's not there to waste time with his fans. He's there to learn and to get better. And so part of that is having the appropriate training partners and drills and whatever it is that John needs to get him through. So I'm not saying like, oh, this is a terrible thing, it should never have happened, but at some point, you know, like I need Gordon to train with these guys and I need Gary to do this specific drill. It's not just, hey, you're part of the same academy, therefore you get to drill or you get to train with or whatever. So you could kind of watch them. I was gone by the time this happened, but I would go back and I would see it, you know, as I went back over the years, and there'd be this kind of like segmentation. And Gary's still, like when I went there, like I still trained with Gary. It wasn't a super intense rule. I mean, I didn't expect it to be. But, I mean, it's not like they were like, oh, we're the best and screw all the rest of you. I mean, there's enough good talent in the room that they would train. They could train with good people. But it definitely was a segment. And if you weren't one of the kind of the people that they knew were not going to be an idiot, which is fair, right? Like, that's not wrong to say, like, I don't want idiots training and getting people injured or turning this into a mat war that doesn't need to be. And isn't good for the athlete. Because you want to be on some ego trip.
But that tendency to isolate the talent from the non-talented people, I I feel like has a long-term detrimental impact to the
It can.
academy. Like, I don't know, if you are going to focus all of your time on a small group of people, I think it's important to let those people interact with and disperse the information that they have amongst the non.
Yes. Well,
but
the nice
they get the privilege of choosing which one of the non.
The nice thing about Henzo's was John was still the instructor and still taught everybody and taught the entire class. You know, unless he was away for competition or something else specific, he was the one. If you went to the morning class and he was in town, which he was more often than not, although probably less than when I was there. When I was there, he was always there. He wasn't going anywhere unless there was like GSP had a fight and he was going to corner him. But if you were a regular student, regular black belt, I mean, there'd be like 50 black belts on the mat, but you would go and John would teach the class. And, you know, everybody else would be there. They might, when it comes down to train, they might go off in the corner and train with each other.
That's a special circumstance though, because like, I think it's a weird situation where the head instructor is not the same as the best instructor. Like where, like, you know, in most academies I've visited where they're competitive, you have like the main guy,
right?
And then the royals, right? All the competitive people. And
Royals.
And then the
I
peasants,
totally disagree with that representation,
right?
but go on.
The peasants at the bottom, right? And then the main guy will distribute wealth and resources among the royalty, and then he'll have the royalty teach the peasants and interact with the peasantry, right? Versus over here with John, it's like John teaches to both, and then
That's because John is such a perfectionist that he would never trust it. That's not true. He would have other people
So
teach,
it's
but
more like John's in the middle, and you got John helping normal people and successful people, but then still separating them. Versus the other model, there's more connection between the competitive team and the non-competitive people, but there's a complete separation between the head guy and the people. So there's like a weird.
I mean, I don't know how many schools when they get big, which model they adopt. I think because Henzo is so active in the community and so like he has so many academies and he's like off doing so many things that he has to adopt some sort of, he has to put somebody else in charge. You know, Henzo would come in, but not like by the time I was like later, like he had opened up other academies and you know, you didn't see Henzo every day. You'd still see him occasionally, but I can't remember, you know, I probably hadn't trained with Henzo in years, you know, at the end. You know, because he just wasn't there, or he wasn't training, or if he was there, he's running a business, he's doing other stuff. Whereas in the beginning, like he'd show up and he'd train. But that was when we were very small. As the school got a lot bigger, he can't teach every class.
But John basically adopts that role, right, as it expands, and then Henzo adopts a new higher role of like overseeing all the new affiliations, right?
I mean, the structure is, I mean, I couldn't really go into the structure because I don't really know it that well myself. But like Henzo is not hands-on managing the affiliations, right? He has another person doing it, or a group of people doing it, that handle like, because there's 50 affiliated, more or more.
But he's still like doing stuff that's not directly teaching jiu-jitsu.
He's like, I would say he is the brand ambassador, and if they're like, he coaches his nephew, right, for MMA, for Bellator, you know, like he'll corner him and get him ready.
But he's just like beyond the point where he can only focus on one academy.
No, I mean, he can't. He's not doing that. You know, and John, I think, is such a perfectionist that he really doesn't want, he's not the type that's going to be like, I mean, you notice this, right? At some point he's like, recently he's like, I have to move away so I can focus on this single group and not all these other people.
That's the thing about perfectionism. If it gets too out of control, then it's like you don't even want to deal with people who can't even get to your expectations.
I don't think that it's not that he didn't want to deal, because that was pretty much the whole thing, that he had already done that in a way. And I think, I mean, my sense is that, you know, by removing himself, he reduces the load of like having to teach and do privates. You know, I don't think I mean, personally, I would find it hard to believe that he could keep up that workload that he was doing for, you know, he's 50. He's my age. You know, like I couldn't do that. And he's a better athlete than me and smarter than me. And But he has a lot more miles on his body than I do.
I am interested to see like how the academy is affected by his departure, right? Because I think for me, like when I am doing things in the academy and teaching and instructing and developing people and trying to like build the whole thing, like my focus is partly like I want to get a system that's kind of self-sustaining, where like I can teach enough ideas and have enough of my jiu-jitsu out in the student population to where like they will be able to pass on that information effectively. And my goal as an instructor is to get other people to that place where I'm no longer necessary. And
like, there are enough people that have trained a long enough time with John and are his students and have been his rookies and have been with him for 10 years or longer, 20 years, that I don't have any doubt that people will be able to, that there are enough people that can step into the breach and like kind of fill his shoes a little bit. And I don't mean to, I don't want to say like there'll never be a replacement for John and he's one of a kind, but he's a unique guy. I mean, everybody's unique too. He's a human, but there are a lot of really talented people, both like conceptually talented and physically talented. But I mean, there's no one that's John. There's no one that does Renzo. There are people that are better than Renzo at jiu-jitsu right now, right? He's not going to win every jiu-jitsu match. He probably wouldn't, but you can't replace him because there's other things, there's intangibles that he brings. And one of the things that John does is that he has this like perpetual need to like refine and make things even better. And so, he kind of, I always thought of his videos that he's been putting out as kind of like his magnum opus, right? Like here, I'm setting down everything.
This is all of my ideas.
This is everything. And he gives the blueprint. It's not just like, here, you're going to do a Kimura, you have to put it here, and then take this angle, and do this, and make sure your pinky is wrapped around there. He does do that. He'll get out the ruler and the compass. But he also talks about like the concepts that kind of led him to and inform. So he's laid all this stuff down so that people, like he has his system, like this is everything that he's downloaded.
But I wonder
but he's not done. He's not done. That's not like he's like, oh yeah, jiu-jitsu, I've solved the problem and now.
I do wonder like how much of it actually represents his total body knowledge.
It's pretty comprehensive. It's hard to say like this is 75% of what he knows. But in terms of putting all these pieces together, between him and Gary and Gordon and Eddie to a certain extent, although Eddie has a different kind of thing that he does, he has different mechanics and different kind of ideas like locking and things like that. But when you put all of them together, you get a pretty if you were going to say like, there's only one guy, one series of DVDs or videos that you could watch and just learn the most about jiu-jitsu, I'd say, well, do you have $5,000? Because then you could just buy John's DVDs and you have a pretty good both macro and micro.
Would you though?
Yes. If you were just saying one video, like one person's videos.
Yeah, but like, I feel like if I just sat down and watched.
No, I wouldn't say that's how you would get good at jiu-jitsu.
Like you would have the available information.
I would say if you were like, okay, Rich, you had to go on a spaceship to a planet.
By yourself?
You had but your mission on the planet was to teach jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're only going to live so long. You're not going to be immortal. So you have to bring something with you to communicate what jiu-jitsu is to this alien race.
Are they humanoid?
Yes, they're built. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter.
It kind of matters.
I mean, yes, they're humanoid.
All right. So
right?
you can do jiu-jitsu on them.
What? Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And my mission was to like, hey, this race needs jiu-jitsu to survive or whatever.
You would bring something?
And I could bring one thing with me.
Uh-huh.
It would be John's instructions.
That's fair.
Not to say that anybody else doesn't have good instructions. I'm just saying like, I know, like I'm good with this, right? Like this all makes sense to me. I can explain it. I can teach it. This is like
a Bible.
It's like an instruction manual. because it's not. It's John never says like this is it. This is the only thing you need to know, or this is the only thing that works, or my way is the best way, or anything like that. He's not like absolutist like that. What he will say is he will explain the concepts, the ideas, the strategies, the tactics. Say these are the high percentage, highest level of competition. This is what works. Not the only thing that works. That nothing will never else will ever otherwise will work, or no athlete could make this stuff look silly or anything like that. He's not like this is it. This is I bequeath unto you jiu-jitsu. Come and drink at the fountain of knowledge. He's not like arrogant or like that's not the presumption.
You know how we were talking about King of the Hill yesterday?
Yes.
So like I was thinking about Hank and him as a character, and why I like him so much, like he's very conservative. He has very set in his ways values about the way things are and should be done. But at the same time, when new situations come up that he hasn't encountered, he is able to, as a character, adapt and improvise and kind of go with the flow, sometimes uncomfortably, but he is willing to adapt and change his previously held ideas that he does value, knows work. He knows these values work.
Yes.
But he knows that there needs to be some modifications every once in a while. And I really think that's the perfect balance between like having a really strong root of like a system that has been proven to be true, but at the same time knowing that it's not always going to be enough, and you will at times have to build upon it or even break it up a little bit, depending on the situation. And I don't know, sometimes I'm very like, jiu-jitsu isn't real, like you can do whatever you want, and other times I'm like the Kimura needs to be done in this way, otherwise it's garbage. And it's like this weird balance between like concrete ideas and the potential of what could be done in jiu-jitsu, and what you don't always have to be limited by the system that has been already established, but it's very, very, very useful in getting you up to speed with what has worked in the past. So you don't have to go through that experimental process by yourself.
We're not learning. No, I went through a process to learn jiu-jitsu that like no one goes through, right? It doesn't exist. Which is good for everybody, right? Like that is not the way I learn jiu-jitsu. Like is not the most efficient way to learn jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
Right? And you build on this body of knowledge, so you're not reinventing the wheel. So that's why you have 15-year-olds that are just like murdering elite level black belts, because the methods and the techniques and the understanding of how these things work together and how to exploit, certain strategies or methods, other methods that you'll face, and the level of competition is different. The level of instruction is different. Like when I started, there was like one. If you had a black belt instructor, like you were, I consider myself to be the luckiest student in the country, because I had an actual real life black belt teaching me classes. And now there are black belts everywhere. You go to any gym, you throw a stick, you're probably going to hit a black belt. And the quality of jiu-jitsu, just the experience of jiu-jitsu is so much higher than when I started, when it was just like a bunch of white belts thrashing each other, not really understanding what they were doing, having no, like, basically it was very mechanistic, right? Like, just grab his arm and or crank back, and like, we didn't think about anything other than get the collar and cross choke, and like, that was it. There was, you could get, people, I remember the first time I saw somebody take the back from like the mount, right? Where you get the gift wrap and you take the back, and I was like, before that we were literally trying to like lift people up and like roll them over. You try to get your chest behind.
Well, that's because the first solution to that problem was, I'm gonna punch you in the face until you turn yourself.
Yes, that's literally what you were taught, right? He won't turn over, so you slap him until he turns over. If he doesn't turn over, then you're gonna knock him out.
The gift wrap wasn't needed until like 1980 or something.
It's just we looking back, and not to say there weren't really good technical people back then. Just we didn't have access to them. It was like they were all in Brazil, or they were in LA somewhere. They were wherever. And so now it's like there's just so much good jiu-jitsu, and if you want, I mean, there's so much information that's just free and floating out there.
It's like the technological explosion of technology. Like there are so many. The number of people doing jiu-jitsu is growing exponentially. At least like I think it is. It seems like it is. And just the number of people focusing.
Not anymore. After a pandemic, all these academies are closing down. But
true. But as the number of people continues to expand, like the game's just going to get more and more complex. As you get into those like smaller and smaller bits of details, right?
Yeah.
You can go further into the fractal of how to partition.
I don't know if it's going to get more complex or it's going to be. We'll have a better understanding of the complexity so that it seems more simple. You know what I mean? Like once you sort of understand, like you get a better granular understanding of like all the little micro details that I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
Once you master that stuff, jiu-jitsu seems simple. You know what I mean? Like when you look at it, like Kanan versus Hidalgo.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought that, and I now I always, this is my new rule, is like whatever I think is going to happen, I should just change it.
Yeah.
Because I thought that Kanan was going to come out and have this war with Hidalgo, and they were going to like, roar, and Kanan basically just slide by, took his back, and choked him out, and made him look. I mean, honestly, made Hidalgo look like a very strong white belt. I mean, I don't mean disrespect, but the match took like 2 minutes, and 2 minutes of that was Kanan on his back, and Hidalgo just defending. So it's now, of course, I mean, in Hidalgo's defense, he's not training jiu-jitsu. He hasn't had a jiu-jitsu match in a long time. He's focused on MMA. Totally different animal, but.
So you think like that is part of the process of was that connected to the emergence of more simple techniques?
If you look at like, no, I don't mean to say that the techniques are simple, but it just seems like it's like the process of the match seems simple.
More straightforward.
More straightforward, like because like there isn't this like, and Kanan's like really good. Like he's a very technical guy. He's also a beast, but it's very rare that I see him just go out and try to like club you into, or club his opposition or his opponent into like submission. He's like slick, and he moves. A lot of these guys move very slickly. They're very dynamic. They're very athletic, but they're finding ways to get to the back very quickly. Yeah. And there's not a lot of this like intricate, like I think of intricate guard passing. I think like Lucas Liberi. Very intricate, or Rafa Mendes, just like basics, like deliberate destruction of your, and like
they seem to
meticulous destruction of your guard.
Yeah.
And now like guys are like, I'm not even gonna mess with your guard. I'm just gonna go right to your back somehow. And there could be intricate like a Berimbolo or.
Well, I mean that's sort of like Toriano style passing has always been popular, right? I'm just gonna grab your legs and I'm gonna hop until you die, and I can pass.
Yeah.
There's that aggressive approach has always been an effective method.
Yes.
And then.
But they make it seem so easy.
Yeah.
There's not. I mean, even the guys that are like running around all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem super hectic to me. It's like dynamic, and there's a method. At first glance, you're just like, oh, this guy's just a cardio machine. He's just running around. But when you really look at it, you're like, no, these guys are very precise in their movements, and they're just getting to your back, man. It's just.
And it's like they know what's going on with the knees and the hips in a way that like I still don't really kind of get. I've been kind of getting an understanding, like I've been trying to like staple more things and really work on controlling the knees and turning the hips, but like just watching, especially like Rafa Mendes do stuff with the leg drag and just like dynamic passing, and it
just seems like there's a lot less of like I am going to pin your hips to the ground, one inside or outside, and then pass very forcefully, and a lot more of like I'm going to jump around and just get to your back.
Yeah.
right? I mean, that seems to be the style. And I don't mean to say that's like, oh, it's just frenetic and athletic, because it's not.
But it's like they're over here, you turn to address them, and then now they're
Yes.
behind you here.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay. You turn over here, and then they're right here, maybe a little bit higher,
Yeah.
and then they're just gradually working their way up.
You know, the guys who do that, like I think of like JT Torres is still kind of that old school. Like he just grinds you down. But he can blow. But Gordon, for example, isn't a grinder.
Yeah.
He's like a floater.
Him and Keenan are both like that. Where it's like they're just like they get up. The last match I saw them at, they're just kind of like just slowly,
Yeah.
and then they did stuff. But it wasn't at all aggressive or.
I mean, like it reminds me in a weird way of how Hodger would pass. Because Hodger is like just a great stack passer, pressure passer. I mean, I don't want to say he's the original, but he's one of the best guys to pressure pass ever. Once he get that little bit of an inch on you, or a millimeter, he would just grind you into your guard into dust until he passed. But you know, he always just seemed to, because he was so big, I think, and so long, that he would just kind of like. He never seemed to be like, like there never seemed to be like one focus of his pass where it's like he's just kind of like blanketing you and smothering you, like your whole body, until you just surrender. It's like a glacier. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's not like this. Like if you go to Hoffa's like you gotta push this down and get this like shelved here, and then turn, and then there's like these very precise angles and this intense pressure, and then but super movement at the same time, but tight. You know, like what are they, you know, the back step, or the long step, like a lot of long stepping. You know, but the current generation is like it's not like super, it doesn't seem like it like super precise. A pin here, trap that, regrip here. It's more like fluid. It's more fluid than anything. Anyway, it's interesting to see how things have evolved.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to like pin stuff down.
I wonder if people are getting more like less willing to let people get like lapel grips, so they're not allowing themselves to engage in and like, you know, stop and then work a technical pass versus like I can avoid that problem altogether and just like.
I mean, if I
stay
start to
on
make
the
grips, then you can make grips on. If I'm wearing a gi, right? If I start gripping on your legs, then you're going to grip my arms.
Well, one of the classic approaches to guarding passing guard was always like stepping down in the middle.
Yeah.
Right? And like we're gonna
Yes.
start in this like semi-knee cut.
Yeah, it's a good way to get like worm guard.
Yes. And now that worm guard is a thing, people.
It's like nobody does it.
Yeah.
It's unwise.
Yeah.
It's unwise to sit here like that. All right, guys. I don't know if anybody watched that one, but if anybody's watching now or in the future, nothing tomorrow or Friday, right? Today's Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then nothing next week. All right. Happy New Year. Happy holidays. Be good. Make good decisions.
I'm gonna gain 10 pounds next week.
That's your goal?